Let's talk about array parameters. Parameters with arrays are a bit touchy, so we want to be careful that we talk about the issues that arise when you try and pass an array to a function. Like other variables, arrays can be passed to functions as arguments. However, doing so requires special syntax. Remember that an argument is a value used in a function call. An argument can be either a literal value, such as 10, or the string Ricky Bobby, or the number 24.22. Or an argument can be a variable. Each argument corresponds to a function parameter, which, as we mentioned before, is a placeholder that needs to be filled in when you make a function call. Parameters are used by a function to complete its work. Most of the parameters we have used thus far are value parameters. This means that the arguments we provide have their value passed to the function. Changes to the parameters inside the function have no effect on the actual argument. Instead of value parameters, however, array arguments are treated as what we call reference parameters. So what are reference parameters? Well, when an array is passed as a parameter, the memory address of the element at index 0 is passed rather than a copy of the value stored at that memory address. Because the memory address of the array is passed as the argument to a function, any changes made to the contents of the array parameter are actually made to the array argument in the calling function. For example, suppose we had a function called fillList, which took an array as a parameter. We could specify an array parameter in the function header by using the bracket notation to indicate the parameters in an array. Take a moment to look at this code sample before you. Notice how the first parameter identifies list as an array parameter, using not just type and name, but also an empty set of square brackets. It's important to remember that this set of brackets should remain empty. Inside the function, the variable list can be accessed just like any other array. When the function is called, the corresponding argument of an array type is specified by using the name of the array variable, just like other arguments. Take a look at this code sample before you, with two lines of code, one which creates an array of size 10, and one which calls the function fillList using that array. Note that the brackets are not used when specifying an argument to a function call. It is important to remember that the called function has no knowledge of the actual size of the array. In this example, the second argument, 10, is used to signify the size of the array. This argument corresponds to an integer parameter called size that the function uses to help do its work. The brackets are not used when specifying an argument to a function call. It is important to remember that the called function has no knowledge of the actual size of the array. Remember, it's just being given a memory address. In this example that you see before you, the second argument, the 10, is used to signify Inside the function, the variable list can be accessed just like any other array. When the function is called, the corresponding argument of an array type is specified by using the name of the array variable, just like other arguments we've seen before. See here in the code sample before you that we have two lines of code, an array declaration for an array called myList, and a function call to the function fillList, which gives two arguments. The first is the array that we wish to pass to the function. The second is actually the size of the array. The square brackets are not used when specifying an argument to a function call. It is important to remember that the called function has no knowledge of the actual size of the array. In the example we see here, the second argument, 10, is used to signify the size of the array. This is something that we've done on the programming end to help our function realize how big our array is. This argument 10 corresponds to an integer parameter called size that the function uses to help do its work. This is not built into C++. This is something we've built for this example, and I recommend building it into your functions when you use arrays. If we want to pass an array by value, we simply precede the data type in the parameter list by the keyword const, which we've seen before in other contexts. A const parameter is, as you might expect, constant. In other words, it cannot be altered by the function. A const parameter can have its contents fetched and examined, but not changed. This restriction is enforced by the C++ compiler. Keep in mind that in the example you see here, list is still a reference parameter, but because it's const, it cannot be changed by the function. So here's your assignment. Create a C++ program to do the following. Input the three vector components x, y, and z into an array of type double. Do not use a function, do this in the main function, and do not validate the input. After you've done that, create a function with this prototype that you see here called echoprint. This function will output the given array parameter using a for loop, and it will use the second parameter, number of elements, in the for loop condition. Once you've created this function, call it from main, and then run your program to verify that it works. Before moving on, I recommend hitting the pause button. Next, do the following. Create a function with this prototype for a function called compute magnitude, which will compute the magnitude of the given array. We're treating the array as a vector, so think back on your physics training. Use a for loop with the second parameter, number of elements, in the for loop condition. Code this function and then call it from main, and then add code to the main function to output the magnitude of the vector. In other words, to output the value you get back from this function compute magnitude. Finally, run your program to verify it works. I recommend hitting pause before moving on to the next step. Finally, do the following. Create a function with this prototype. Notice here we're going to create a function to normalize a vector. Code the function and call it from main. Add code to main to output the vector. If you think about it, we already have a function to do that. And run your program to verify it works. Finally, when everything is complete, submit the program to Canvas.